Hello, this is Math 0018, Section 3.6. Today we're going to look at adding and subtracting fractions and mixed numbers. So we have those two objectives, adding and subtracting fractions with signs, negatives and positives, and also adding and subtracting mixed numbers. So here are the instructions for adding and subtracting fractions. First of all, if your problem is a subtraction problem, you need to change all of your subtraction signs to adding the opposite, okay? Or you're going to still do the same thing we learned with integers. Keep, change, opposite, like we did back in Chapter 1, okay? So that's the first step. Then you're going to, step 2, if you need to find the least common denominator. So in other words, if you can only add or subtract fractions that are over the same denominator. So if you don't have the same or like denominators, you need to find the least common denominator of your fractions. Then you use that common denominator to write equivalent fractions, just like we did in the last section in section 3.5. Now, after you've done that, you need to add or subtract the numerators and put that result over the common denominator that you just found. And at the end, make sure you simplify your answer to lowest terms, that it's in reduced form. Alright, so let's look at the first problem. We have -3/8 plus 5/8. Now, what you need to see first is that the denominators are the same. Okay, they're both over 8. So we don't have to worry about getting a common denominator. We just need to look at adding or subtracting the numerators. So at this point, you go back to Chapter 1's rules about integers. You have a -3 and a +5. So since the signs are different, the rule is you subtract and keep the sign of the bigger number. So 5 minus 3 is 2, so you write that down, and it's going to be positive because the 5 is bigger, okay? And it would go over the common denominator, over 8, 2 over 8. All right? Now, even though the directions, and this is kind of bad on my part, only say add or subtract as indicated, you always need to make sure your answer is in simplest form. So 2 over 8, we can reduce that because they have a common factor of 2. So I'm going to divide the top and bottom by 2, which would give me 1/4. And that's the final answer there. Now, look at number 2. We went from one that wasn't too bad to one that's got a lot more stuff going on. First of all, it's a subtraction problem, -5/6 minus 7/9. And also, you don't have the same denominator. So this has got a lot more stuff going on in this problem. The first thing you want to do is do your keep, change, opposite with your signs there. Okay? So that's the first thing we're going to do, is we're going to keep the -5/6, and then I'm going to change it to addition. All right, and then I'm going to take the opposite of 7/9, which is going to become -7/9. Now, most of your online programs will keep the negative sign out in front. I like to put the negative in the numerator because that's where you need to see it and that's where you're going to use it. Okay, so what I would do next is I want to write my problem in a vertical format. -5/6 plus -7 over 9. Now, when you do it like this, it gives you room to come out here and get a common denominator for those two numbers. Okay, so you have to think about what will 6 and 9 both go into. There's a lot of different ways to find a common denominator. Remember, the LCD is the same thing as the LCM, the least common multiple. So if you can't just look at these two numbers and tell, one way that will always give you a common denominator, it may not be the least common denominator, but it'll always be a common denominator, is you can multiply the two denominators. 6 times 9, you could use 54, and that would work. You would have to reduce at the end, though. Sometimes, that just makes really big numbers. So if you can think of a smaller denominator, that's a lot easier. What I would do on this, if you can't just tell right away, start with the bigger denominator, 9, and multiply it by 2. 9 times 2 is 18. And then you check and see, and you say, okay, does 6 go into 18? Yes. So there's your common denominator. Now, if we did that, say we did 9 times 2, and we checked, and say, for instance, 6 didn't go into the 18, then you would try 9 times 3 and see if that worked, and 9 times 4, and so on. And you're going to get your common denominator very quickly that way. That's usually the easiest way to get a common denominator. So we know that both 6 and 9 will go into 18. So now it's just like the last section when we were building equivalent fractions. We say 18 divided by 6 is going to be 3. So I'm going to multiply the top and the bottom by 3. Now what you have to be careful of here is that's a negative 5. So negative 5 times 3 is negative 15. Okay, that's our new equivalent fraction. Now we do the same thing on the bottom. 18 divided by 9 is 2. So you will not necessarily be multiplying the two fractions by the same number. It's going to be different most of the time. And then do the numerator. Negative 7 times 2 is negative 14. Okay, so now we're looking at these two fractions, negative 15 over 18 and negative 14 over 18. Now that they're over the same denominator, we can look at the numerators. So look at the numerators. The signs are the same. They're both negative. So the rule is you add and keep the sign. So that's negative 29 over 18. Now, think about this. What goes into 29 and 18? Nothing, just 1. So that's it. You can leave your fraction in that format. All right, let's look at a couple more. Wow, this first one we've got a bunch. The one nice thing about number 3 is that there's no subtraction signs. It's all addition. So what I'm going to do, I don't need to change any signs. Let's go ahead and write the problem vertically. 3/8, I will have a negative 1/2 and 7/12. And I'm going to add all three fractions at the same time. Okay? Do not be afraid, grasshopper. You can do this. Okay? So, we got to find a common denominator. All right, so 8, well, 2 goes into 8. 2 also goes into 12. So you need to think about what would 8 and 12 go into. Start with 12. That's the biggest denominator. 12 times 2 is 24. Well, check the other numbers. 8 goes into 24. That's good. 2 goes into 24. Cool. So now they all go into 24. So that's what I'm going to set up as my new common denominator here. Okay? So 24 is the common denominator. So now you do your division. 24 divided by 8 on that first fraction is 3. So I have to multiply the top and bottom by 3. 3 times 3 would be 9. And then on the middle fraction, 24 divided by 2 is going to be 12. And then keep the negative in the numerator. Negative 1 times 12 is negative 12. Okay? And then on the bottom, 24 divided by 12 is 2. So 7 times 2 would be 14. Okay. There are a lot of different ways you can do this because what we're doing now is you're looking at adding the numerators on those three fractions, 9, negative 12, and 14. So it might help to kind of write it out, 9 plus negative 12 plus 14 all over 24. That might make it easier to see what you're doing, okay? So I would probably just go straight across because the numbers are not as big that way. If you look at 9 plus negative 12, you have to subtract there because the signs are different. That would give you negative 3 plus 14, still all over 24. Now, negative 3 plus 14, we have to subtract, keep the sign of the bigger number, and that would be 11 over 24. 11 is prime, and it doesn't go into 24, so that's it, 11/24. Okay? All right, let's look at the next one. 2/3 minus 5/6. So we have subtraction. You're going to do keep, change, and opposite. Okay? Oops, sorry. So we have 2/3, keep that the same, plus, that's the change, and the opposite would be negative 5/6. Okay? So now I'm going to set it up vertically so we can get our common denominators. We have negative 5 over 6. So you want to think, what do 3 and 6 both go into? They will both go into 6. So we're going to set up 6 as our common denominator. You could have also used 12, could have used 18, but you want to try and keep the smallest denominator you can think of as possible. That makes it just easier to deal with. All right, so on the first fraction, 6 divided by 3 up there on the top is 2. So 2 times 2 would be 4. Okay, and then down here on the bottom one, 6 divided by 6 is 1. So negative 5 times 1 is negative 5. Now, you've got a positive and a negative on your numerators there. So the rule is subtract and keep the sign of the larger number. So 5 minus 4 is 1, and it's going to be negative because the 5 is larger over 6. And that would be it, negative 1/6. All right, so now we're going to look at adding and subtracting mixed numbers. So really this is also going to give you more practice on adding adding fractions, adding and subtracting fractions, because the first thing we're going to do is we're going to change all of our mixed numbers to improper fractions. And then you just follow the same rules that we've just been doing for adding and subtracting fractions. So this will give you more practice, which is good. So here's the steps. Step 1, change every mixed number to an improper fraction. That way you're only dealing with fractions, so it makes it a lot easier. Then once again, if you have subtraction signs, you're going to do keep change opposite, just like we've been doing. Okay? And then if you need to, get that common denominator, okay, and build your equivalent fractions. Add or subtract the numerators. Now with these problems, they usually want you to write your answer back as a mixed number. So that's what we're going to do, is write our answer as a mixed number in simplest form. Okay? All right, so we have 6 3/4 plus 5 2/3. So remember, the first step is to change them to improper fractions. So remember, that's multiply and add. So 4 times 6 is 24, plus 3 would be 27 over 4. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and put this in a vertical format. All right, and then 5 2/3, 3 times 5 is 15, plus 2 would be 17 over 3. So that's the two fractions that I want to deal with. Now, this does make the numerators kind of large, but it's so much easier when you're adding and subtracting this way because you don't have to worry about crazy simplifying, and you also, when you get into subtraction, don't have to worry about borrowing. So this makes it a lot easier to do it this way. All right, so look at 4 and 3. We have to find a common denominator there. Well, if you multiply 4 times 3, you get 12, which also happens to be the least common denominator. So go back to the first fraction. 12 divided by 4 is 3. So now we have to multiply the top by 3. So 3 times 27, what the heck is that? Carry it to 81. Okay? All right, and on the bottom, 12 divided by 3 is 4. So 17 times 4 is 28. Carry a 2, 68. Okay? So now we're adding 81 plus 68 would be 149 over 12. Now, once again, the directions did not give you anything specific, but I'm pretty sure that in your online homework and quizzes, it will ask you to write that as a mixed number. Now, here's a way you can kind of cheat with the calculator. It's not really cheating, it's just using it wisely. So what you want to do is write this out to change it to a mixed number. So we're going to do 149 divided by 12. So in your calculator, 149 divided by 12 comes out to 12.41666 blah blah blah. Okay? All you need are the digits in front of the decimal point. You want to put the 12 on top of the problem, okay? Because that's the whole number part of your quotient, the 12. Then you multiply 12 times 12, and that gives you 144. You put that underneath, and you subtract, which leaves 5. Well, now you can write your mixed number just like we did in the beginning of this chapter. So it'd be 12 and 5/12. And there's your answer without any straining of your brain, which is good. Makes it a lot easier. All right, let's look at number 2. Here we have negative 4 1/12 plus 7 7/8. So we're going to multiply and add, multiply and add. Okay, so 4 times 12 is 48, plus 1 is 49 over 12. Then go back and put that negative sign there. All right, 8 times 7 is 56, plus 7 is what, 63 over 8. So we're looking at those two fractions. Okay, so what you want to do, look at 12 and 8, figure out what they'll both go into. Well, 12 times 2 is 24, and 8 will go into 24. So we can use that as our common denominator. Okay? All right. So 24 divided by 12 is 2. So I have to multiply the top by 2. So that's going to be 1898. Okay? So negative 98, don't forget your negative sign there. It's on the top. And then in the bottom, 24 divided by 8 would be 3. So I multiply 63 times 3, which gives me 189. Okay, so now, to me, at this point, I'm going to pull out my calculator because I'm lazy. I've got a negative 98 and a positive 189. Since the signs are different, you have to subtract 189 minus 98, and that's going to give you 91, and it's positive because the 189 is bigger, over 24. Now, what you want to do is divide that out. 91 divided by 24, which if you do that in your calculator, you get 3 point blah blah blah. So all you need is the 3, the number in front of the decimal point. Then you multiply. 3 times 24 is 72, and when you subtract, you get 19. Okay? All right, so now your mixed number, start at the top with the 3, is going to be 3 and 19 over 24. And that's your answer there. Okay? All right. Look at number 3. It says evaluate the variable expression x plus y plus z for the given values of x, y, and z. And so they've told us that x is 1 1/2, y is 2 3/4, and z is 6 11/12. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start, because we're going to add those all up by changing all of them to improper fractions. Now, the nice thing is there's no negative signs, so we don't have to worry about that. So the first one, 1 1/2, 2 times 1 is 2, plus 1 would be 3 over 2. So I'm going to write them up here so we have enough room. Okay, then we have the middle one, 4 times 2 is 8, plus 3 would be 11 over 4. That's our second fraction. And 6 11/12. Let's see, 6 times 12 is 72. Okay, and what is that? 83 over 12. Okay, and those are the fractions we're going to add up. Now, 2, 4, and 12, they'll all go into 12. Okay, so our common denominator is going to be 12. And like I said, it's nice we don't have any negatives. So on the first fraction up here at the top, 12 divided by 2 is 6. So multiply 3 times 6, that would be 18. Okay? In the middle, 12 divided by 4 is 3. So 11 times 3 would be 33. Okay? And on the bottom, 12 divided by 12 is 1. So 83 times 1 is 83. So you're talking about some pretty big numbers there. Okay? So we are going to add all of our numerators. 18 plus 33 plus 83 equals 134 over 12. Okay? So now I need to change that to a mixed number. 134 divided by 12. So you put 134 in your calculator, divided by 12, comes out to 11 point blah blah blah. Okay? Now, you multiply 11 times 12. It's like the one multiplication table I always have a hard time with. That's 132. Okay? We subtract. That just leaves 2. So we have as our mixed number 11 and 2 over 12. Now, here is the gold star question of the day. Can I leave my answer like that? No, because 2 12ths can be reduced. So you don't do anything with the whole number, with the 11, but you have to reduce that fraction. So your final answer is going to be 11 and 1/6. And that's the answer there. Okay? Alright, so here's some for you to try. Pause the video and try these, because these fraction problems, they're pretty tough, okay? And I know a lot of people place into this class because of fractions, so don't let this be your Achilles heel. Work at it send me emails, call me, let me know if you need help with this, because this stuff is hard. All right, so number 1, 1/9 minus 5/27. First step, keep, change, oops, and opposite. Well, that didn't really work out the way I meant to write it, but you get the gist. Can't even talk. All right, so we're going to have 1/9 plus negative 5 over 27. Keep, change, opposite. So I'm going to write them vertically. Okay, plus a negative 5 over 27. All right, so my common denominator there would be 27. They'll both go into 27. So 27 divided by 9 is 3. So I multiply the top by 3. 1 times 3 is 3. And on the bottom, 27 divided by 27 is 1. So negative 5 times 1 would be negative 5. So we have a 3, positive 3, and negative 5. You have to subtract and keep the sign of the larger number, which would be negative 2 over 27. And remember, with fractions, you can write the negative sign in the numerator. You can write it in front of the fraction before you type the fraction in, or it can also be in the denominator. I think the format that WebAssign probably uses the most is kind of out in front, but it doesn't matter where you put the negative as long as it's there somewhere. All right, number 2, 1/3 minus 1/4 minus 1/2. So we're going to have to do keep, see if I can do it right this time, change, and opposite on both of these subtraction signs. So it's going to be 1/3, keep that the same, add, that's the change, and then the opposite would be negative 1/4. Okay, so negative 1/4 is now the keep, change it to addition, and the opposite of 1/2 would be negative 1/2. So we're looking at 1 positive fraction and 2 negative fractions, negative 1/4 and negative 1/2. Okay, so we've got to find a common denominator for 3, 4, and 2. All of those will go into 12. So usually on these problems, the common denominators are not going to be crazy large. They're going to be pretty normal, okay? So we're going to set up 12 as our common denominator. Okay. Go back to the first fraction on top. 12 divided by 3 is 4. So 1 times 4 would be 4. Now in the middle, 12 divided by 4 is 3. So multiply negative 1 times 3 would be negative 3. Okay? And on the bottom fraction, 12 divided by 2 would be 6. So negative 1 times 6 would be negative 6. All right, so this is kind of messy. If you want to write out all the numerators, 4 plus negative 3 plus negative 6 all over 12, that might make it easier to see what you're doing, okay? Now, you could do the two negatives, 4 plus negative 9, okay, negative 3 and negative 6, I added those together, all over 12, okay, and then 4 plus negative 9, remember you subtract and keep the sign of the bigger number, so it'd be negative 5 over 12, and that would be it. So you just have to be careful about your adding and subtracting rules at the end there, okay? All right, so here we have 2/3 minus negative 1/2. So the first thing again, keep, change, opposite. So 2/3 stays the same, change it to addition, and the opposite of a negative is a positive. So we just have two positive fractions, 2/3 plus 1/2. Okay, so a common denominator for 3 and 2 would be 6. Set that up. 6 divided by 3 is 2, so 2 times 2 would be 4 on top of that first fraction. Now, on the bottom, 6 divided by 2 is 3, so 1 times 3 is 3. And now if you add, 4 plus 3 would be 7 over 6. If they ask you to write it as a mixed number, remember you're dividing. 6 will go into 7 one time, and that leaves 1 left over. So your mixed number would be 1 and 1/6. So it just depends on how they ask for the answer. If they don't ask you to write it as a mixed number, you could leave it as 7 over 6. But if they specify write your answer as a mixed number, you need to change it to 1 and 1/6. Just depends on what they say. Okay? Number 4, 5 minus 3 3/4. Now, this is a perfect example. If you kept them as mixed numbers, you would have to borrow, which is a big pain in the butt. We're not going to do it that way. We're going to keep it simple. Okay? So what you're going to do is, first of all, you're going to put 5 over 1, and then we're going to change 3 3/4 to an improper fraction. So I have 5 over 1, okay, and it's going to be minus 3 3/4. So 3 times 4 is 12, plus 3 would be 15 over 4. Now here's one thing. On this problem, when it's subtraction like this, you could do keep change opposite, but you really don't have to. You could just keep it as subtraction. Here's why. Look at the original whole numbers, 5 minus 3. 5 is definitely bigger, so you could just keep that as subtraction if you wanted to. It might make it a little simpler. So we're just going to do 5 over 1 minus 15 over 4. And the only thing you have to be careful of is when you get down to the end and you've got your numerators, make sure you subtract. That's the main thing. So the common denominator for 1 and 4 is 4. So I set those up. 4 divided by 1 is 4. So multiply on top. 5 times 4 is 20. And on the bottom fraction, 4 divided by 4 is 1. So 15 times 1 is 15. Now make sure you subtract. 20 minus 15 is 5 over 4. They may want that as a mixed number. So think about this. 4 goes into 5 one time. There's 1 left over. So your answer as a mixed number would be 1 and 1/4. And that would be it there. Okay? All right, so here's a couple more. Oh, these look kind of messy with the signs. So on the first one, because you've got all the subtraction signs there, you definitely need to change the signs. So we're going to do keep, change, opposite. So negative 3 1/2, that's a keep. Change it to addition, and the opposite would become positive 6 2/3. Okay? Now, the next step, change them to improper fractions. So we're going to multiply and add, and multiply and add. So that's going to be 6, 2 times 3 is 6, plus 1 would be negative 7 over 2. That's our first improper fraction. And then the second one, 3 times 6 is 18, plus 2 would be 20 over 3. Okay, so now there's our two improper fractions. 2 and 3, the common denominator would be 6. Okay, so do the same process we've been doing. 6 divided by 2 is 3. So negative 7 times 3 would be negative 21. And then on the bottom fraction, 6 divided by 3 is 2. So multiply by 2. Multiply by 2 on top, that would be 40. Okay? Now, the signs are different on our numerators. So we have to subtract and keep the sign of the bigger number, so we know it's going to be a positive. And if you subtract 40 minus 21, you're going to get 19 over 6. Okay? So I would probably go ahead, change it to a mixed number. 19 divided by 6 goes 3 times. That's 18, and that leaves 1. So there's your mixed number. 3 and 1/6. That's it for that one. Okay? Number 6. Same thing again with that subtraction, because you got all those minus and negative signs at the beginning. You want to do keep change opposite. So it's going to be negative 4 and 2/3 stays the same. Change it to addition, and the opposite would become negative 1 and 1/6. Okay? Next step, change them to improper fractions. So it's going to be 12 plus 2 would be negative 14 over 3. Okay? Plus the 6, 1 and 1/6 would be 6 times 1 is 6, plus 1 would be 7 over 6, and that's also a negative. All right, so 3 and 6. The common denominator there would be 6. Okay, set that up. So 6 divided by 3 is 2. So now we multiply negative 14 times 2 would be negative 28. Okay, do the same procedure below. 6 divided by 6 is 1. And negative 7 times 1 would be negative 7. All right? Now, be careful. The two numerators have the same sign. They're both negative. So the rule, add and keep the same sign. So that would be negative 35 over 6. So we need to write that as a mixed number. 35 divided by 6 goes 5 times. 6 times 5 is 30. And you have a remainder of 5. So your mixed number is going to be a negative 5 and 5, 6. And that would be it. Okay? And I'm pretty sure that should be it. Yep, for 3.6. So make sure that you keep working on those fractions.